Why worms try to escape your worm farm is one of the hardest things to figure out for a new worm farm owner. We're going to try to help you sort that out on today's video. My name is Steve Churchill, and this is the Urban Worm Company. So you just spent good money on worms. The last thing you want to see them doing is suffering a quick death on your floor. So naturally, when worms try to escape and do it by the hundreds or thousands, it's alarming. So let's try to figure this out. Guys, I think you're going to like this video. If you've got issues with escaping worms, or at least you think that they're trying to escape, do me a solid, like this video, hit subscribe. And if you're really into what I'm talking about, click that little bell to let you know every time we release a new video. All right, let's get into it. I think we need to first start by understanding what we mean by worms trying to escape. When worms literally work their way out of your bin and end up on the floor, it does mean they want out of there. But just seeing worms on the inside walls of your worm farm doesn't mean they're trying to escape. Worms love moisture, and they're going to happily wallow in it whenever they can. And if you recently fed your bin, what happens is that food waste releases water and creates a humid environment. That humidity can then condensate on the walls and the lid of your worm farm. And if this is happening in your bin, I would expect to see some worms crawling around. That's no big deal. But it very well may be that worms are trying to get the heck out of Dodge. So what can we do about it? There are a few reasons this is happening. Number one, a sterile worm farm. Guys, I see this mistake all the time, and I made it myself when I started out. People learn about the magic of worms, and then they order worms first, make a worm bin second, and they often head to Lowe's or Home Depot to get a Rubbermaid bin. They'll shred some paper, wet it down, call it bedding, put their worms in it, expecting them to love it. That's a great way to get your worms to try to escape the bin too, because your bin is sterile. Vermicomposting begins and ends with microbes. It's not worms that start the decomposition process, it's microorganisms, specifically bacteria. And the end product of the vermicompost? Sure, it's worm poop, but plants and soil don't really care that it's worm poop. They care that it has a huge and diverse population of microorganisms like bacteria, nematodes, fungi, critters that are eating organic matter and eating each other to release nutrients, strengthen the plants against diseases and pests, and create a healthy plants and soil that produce high yields of fruit and veggies. So when we farm worms, what we're really farming is microbes. Operating rooms in hospitals are sterile, and a close second to that is a new Rubbermaid bin with recently shredded paper. Worms are going to hate that environment and try to leave it. So one of the first things I tell my worm customers is to get their bedding ready with thoroughly moistened bedding, hopefully with a mixture that includes living material like leaf mold or compost, along with some food waste to get the microbe population blooming in the worm farm. And they need to do this before the worms arrive, maybe even before they order the worms in the first place. So if your worm farm is really new and your worms are trying to escape, I think you should ask yourself if you dirtied up your bin enough to give your worms a proper habitat. And if not, try to find a microbe-rich material like compost, leaf mold, manure, or even someone else's vermicompost to turbocharge the microbe population in your worm farm. One of the things we sell here, and I'm not saying you should go out and buy it, but we do sell coconut coir with worm castings. We call this the Worm Success Bundle. We also throw in some worm chow and a thermometer in there. And what happens is that the worm castings are supposed to inoculate that coconut coir with some microbes to help kind of kickstart that population in your worm farm. If you don't buy the Worm Success Bundle, you can do this with using just that living material like I talked about, that leaf mold, compost, vermicompost. Okay, the next thing is a noxious environment in your worm farm. The material in your worm farm may very well have plenty of microbes in it, and this is a very common mistake. Start your worm farm and only add food waste to the mix from then on. You can expect the pH in your vermicompost to drop and for your vermicompost to become very wet as that food waste breaks down. This can lead to stinky, fermenting, anaerobic conditions. It may even heat up a little bit. The worms aren't going to like this either, and they may try to leave the building. If you think this is happening to you, I'd add plenty of dry bedding to help sop up that moisture, and I'd also add some agricultural lime or crushed eggshells to increase the pH. Then I'd keep the worm farm to the open air and under a bright light to air out the bin while keeping the worms in the amended bedding for now. In most cases, I don't think you need to start over or totally change out your vermicompost. Just make the current environment better with more bedding. And I recommend adding your bedding and food waste in a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio, and that ratio is bedding to food waste, and that's by volume. That's going to help keep conditions aerobic and keep that moisture at a reasonable level in your worm farm. Next up is vibration. So you may be aware that Charles Darwin considered earthworms the most important animal on planet Earth. And he did all sorts of experiments with them to see how they reacted to water, which they like, and see how they react to light, which they do not like. And he wondered how the worms would react to sound. And it's kind of hilarious when you think about it. He shouted at them. He literally yelled at his worms. And just like my children, when I tell them to clean their rooms, there was no reaction. But when he took his worms, which he had in a little pot, and he put that pot on top of his piano and started to play it, he noticed that they got very agitated. Not not by the sound, but by the vibration. Now, lots of folks who keep their bins indoors keep them inside utility rooms and basements, which is the same places where we keep our washing machines, air conditioning units, and other HVAC equipment like air handlers. So if your worm farm is sitting on top of, or even just near one of these things, you can expect your worms to try to get as far away from the source of vibration as possible. So obviously the fix here is to just move those things away, and then you don't have to worry about vibration being the reason that worms try to leave your bin. So, too little air. Now, I'm a little skeptical about this reason because I think worms actually need less ventilation than we think they do. But at the same time, an airtight worm farm isn't the best environment for vermicomposting in general or composting worms specifically. So if you've got one of those plastic totes, but you didn't ventilate it and worms are trying to escape, I'd consider drilling a series of holes in the upper wall of your worm farm. Holes in the lid are fine too if you're not keeping your bin outdoors and exposed to the rain, where that rain can pool in and just get right into your worm farm. Next up, and this is an interesting one, you may not have red wigglers. The most common vermicomposting worm, in the US anyways, is the red wiggler, which has the binomial, I call it nerd name, of Eisenia fetida. It's increasingly common these days for worm sellers to sell you red wigglers but deliver you Indian blue worms. Now, Indian blues are an excellent vermicomposter, and maybe even better than the red wiggler. So I don't want to say that you're necessarily getting ripped off when this happens. In fact, your worm seller may not even know that they're selling you Indian blues instead of red wigglers. So let's talk about the difference. They're going to be similarly sized. The Indian blues are going to be similarly sized to the red wiggler, and as long as they're eating organic waste, vermicomposters may not know, and honestly may not care even if they did know the difference. But Indian blues have a strange sensitivity to barometric pressure changes. And I know this sounds odd, but when skies are clear and conditions are nice, the barometric pressure, which is essentially the pressure the atmosphere is exerting on you, is relatively high. But when a thunderstorm approaches your area, the barometric pressure drops, and it can drop very rapidly. Indian blues hate this for some reason, and for lack of a better term, they freak out. It's almost like they decide all at once that, buddy, we're out of here. Now, I've had Indian blues before, and I can't say this always happened to me, but it did happen every now and then, and here's my theory. I think that whether the blues decide to leave is affected by how great of an environment you've got them in. Barometric pressure is high and the vermicompost isn't quite perfect, the blues will probably stay put. And if the environment is perfect and the barometric pressure drops, they may even decide that they'll ride out the storm in your worm farm. But if the pH is too low or something, or maybe there's not enough ventilation, or something's wrong, and you throw in dropping pressure, they may decide that they've had enough and try to leave the bin. Now, I've done a couple videos before on how to recognize the difference between reds and blues, but I think it's worth covering in this video too. And I think that maybe even if you can't tell the difference now, that you're not going to be able to unsee the differences that I'm about to show you. Red wigglers are pretty sluggish worms. They just don't seem like they're doing much. They're small worms, but they have a little chubbiness to them. The clitellum on a red wiggler, which is that fleshy band that you see around adult worms, it's kind of raised from the rest of the body, and it's a distinctly different color and a lighter color than the rest of the worm. Red wigglers also tend to have a distinct yellow banding and a concentrated yellow or yellowish tip at the end of the tail. Indian blues, on the other hand, they're like the red wiggler, but they're skinnier, and their clitellum, or clitella for plural, is flush with their bodies, darker, and it's closer to their head. And they also move differently, and this is an easy one to see. Blues can seriously elongate themselves when they move. Red wigglers just don't do this. While blues can be a little sluggish every now and then, you also see them get the zoomies and thrash around, literally trying to jump out of your hand. Red wigglers are kind of like that basset hound that lays on your couch all day, and Indian blues are the 6-month-old golden retriever that needs to explore everywhere in your house in the next 5 seconds. So if you find yourself with Indian blues, you've got a great composting worm, but it's going to be tougher to handle, especially when thunderstorms approach. All right, guys, if you're watching this, then I'd expect you're somewhat new to vermicomposting. If so, I want to send you a little PDF that's going to help you start up a small worm bin like this one to recycle your food scraps, and you might just find a nice discount code in the guide that you can use to get an urban worm bag, worms, or other products a little bit more cheaply. Just click this little link above my left shoulder. It's going to take you down to the video description where YouTube makes you click another link that you are going to go where you can sign up and get that guide immediately. You can also check the top link in the video description to get that guide. All right, so there's several reasons why worms are going to be trying to leave your worm bin if they're trying to leave it all. And look, I hope this video helped you, and we'll see you on the next video.